comfortable with the cup.
Sorry. We'll go live with coffee in our hands.
Mm-hmm.
He asked you in here as Daniel and Danny, which do you prefer?
Oh gosh, I still don't know the answer to that question. Danny.
Danny.
We'll go with Danny today.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, it's cool, mode.
Where do you want me to stand, Laura? When I introduce her?
I still don't know the answer to that question. Danny.
That's the only way you're going to be able to do is stand in front of the camera.
Right? We're the co-stars. We get to do it anymore. Which side are you on?
Whichever. You want me over here? That's good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Are we ready? All right, welcome to the conversation, everyone. Our facilitator is Byron Skaggs from Evident King. He's an international coach and business strategy consultant. Our guest today is Danny Moorhead. He is the co-owner of Elite Performance and Wellness, a sports training facility in Hamilton that specializes in youth athletic development. Elite also helps provide the strength and conditioning services for several schools in the area, including Hamilton, Fairfield, and Talawanda. In addition to coaching and running a business, Danny is a golfer and power lifter and is a competitor in the World Long Drive. Is that right?
That's right.
Or Long Drive. All right. His favorite thing, though, is spending time with his wife and their 2 dogs. So thank you for joining us. Share this video. Tag a business owner in the comments if you want. And then we'll also do Q&A in the comments. So if you have a question during the conversation at any time, put that down and we'll ask Byron and Danny to respond. Take it away.
Good. Thank you, Tiffany. So we are live, right? Okay, good. Welcome. It's great to see everybody or to have you with us if you are online and we can't really see you, but we'd love to hear from you. Today we're talking about the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. Adam is a professor at Wharton and has been studying, he's kind of a business psychologist mix, or an organizational psychologist, I think is how he just defines himself. So, Dan, we're really glad to have you here with us and to be able to talk about this. Tell us just a little bit about your we've heard your background. So tell us a little bit about Elite Performance and Wellness.
Yeah, so our business focuses on training youth athletes, age range from anywhere from 6, 7 years old all the way up to high school. Even gotten to work with some local guys that have tried to play college and beyond as well. So that's our main specialty, is training youth athletes in any sport, any age, and trying to just help them develop as an athlete and make themselves more well-rounded athlete. So,
Great.
Yeah.
And so let's go back a little bit. When you were 6, 7, 8, maybe even to 10, somewhere in that range, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. My first love was gymnastics. I started doing gymnastics because my sisters were both heavily involved. And I really got heavily involved in gymnastics about the time I was 8 years old or so. I was competing until 12, almost 13. So that was kind of like what I truly admired and felt like was, like the coolest thing ever, was seeing these guys that were older than me, college gymnasts and guys that trained at the facility I was at. And that's really who I kind of idolized as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, was like, these guys that were just super buff and like could, do whatever they wanted with their body. And that's kind of what I just admired and gravitated to. And then as I got older, I enjoyed so many different sports and so many different things that I didn't feel like I could devote the entirety of my time to just gymnastics. And so, after pulling out of that, it gave me the opportunity to really explore a lot of different options for sports in that 11, 12, 13, 14 age range, and then ended up playing college baseball. It was really, where I ended up and was really passionate about playing baseball. And I kind of went into college with the hopes of pursuing a professional career, but they don't like 5'7" outfielders, and the scouts don't like 5'7" outfielders, I guess. But no, it was a lot of fun. Playing college baseball was a great experience. And
so if it's any consolation, I was a catcher, and I couldn't get any scouts to look at a
That's right.
6'7" catcher. So
yeah, there you go.
So if I remember right, because we met about a year ago, you also worked in the water too, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's right. So I took my skills in gymnastics and picked up springboard diving and ended up winning a state championship in springboard diving my junior year. So
okay, so he didn't even mention that in the process of him talking about these other things.
Yeah, that was kind of a blip on the radar for me, because it was it was a ton of fun when I was in it, but I really couldn't see myself pursuing it as like a college career. Okay. Even I was, I think, a 2 or 3 time All-American, and having won state and everything, that was my ultimate goal, is to do that. But never, I liked it for the sake of the competition, but as far as devoting my time and efforts towards it, it wasn't really something that I felt like was what I wanted to pursue. So, but it was a ton of fun, and I love winning, and that was obviously a big awesome feat to pull off the state title. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's great. So tell me about the transition from being an athlete in that realm to, I mean, I see the connection, of course, with elite performance, but that notion of starting your own business, and what has that process been like for you?
Yeah, well, it's been a whole new learning experience in and of itself. It's really not anything. There was nothing that could have really prepared me for it other than being in it, I guess you could say. There was not a lot of, coaching in and of itself is kind of its own sport, or its own, way of having to think and react, if you will. So, I've always really enjoyed it, especially working with kids. I got a job coaching gymnastics at the facility that I train, pretty soon after I got out of college. And that facility there, Jeff Metzger is the guy who started Kids First Sports Center, and I got to kind of know him and pick his brain. That's really kind of what inspired our the vision of kind of our facility and working with youth athletes. And I just realized that's the way, the reason I turned out the way I did was because that foundation of the facility like Kids First made such a big impact on me, and being able to share that with other kids and kind of help teach them good life skills through exercise and through fitness and sports and training is really something that both of us are really passionate about. So
when you say both of you, just you want to.
Casey, who you can't see, but he's
Casey, why don't you come on up here a second?
Oh, there you go.
Just so we can introduce, because both of you guys are co-partners, co-owners of
Give it a wave.
Can you see Casey here? Come on over this way a little bit. There you go. Hi, there's Casey. So, all right. Thank you. It's helpful just to get a little bit of that background.
Yeah.
Because even now, as we begin to kind of look and dive into the book a little bit. Wait a minute, I just said something. Never mind. Sorry, my mind went to diving.
Well, the guy is a diver too.
Wow.
That's why I thought it was funny. But yeah, he speaks on. It's in right here. He was a junior Olympic diver. He never did win a state championship. I remember seeing that. He actually taught the people who beat him the next year.
Really?
Yeah, that was part of the book. But he was it says junior Olympic springboard diver and professional musician.
All right, I just got to. Do divers have to be bald?
No, they don't have to be. Right. It does help entering the water
The
a
best
little more
divers of all,
cleanly.
right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, we're totally off. No, we're
that's
not. So let me just kind of get into a little bit of why we wanted to highlight this book and why this book was even written. So basically, it was the idea that when Adam began working and teaching at Wharton, he started asking some specific questions about how people were interacting with each other, especially in the form of not only their interactions around the office and those kind of things, but when it came to negotiations, when it came to leadership styles. And so, even from the range of networking and collaboration, all of those different components. And for years, the assumption has been that it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world, and that has been the primary goal in business as a zero-sum game. And so his premise and the theory by which he's functioning was that there really had to be something different or something more. And so that's where he began to do his research. So the book is really chock full of all kinds of research and backed by, I think it was 38 or 40 different research projects that encompassed thousands of organizations and work groups and teams and all of the data that they gathered from that. So it's really a heavily fortified, academically researched book. But basically, the idea is that this opens up this conversation to exploring how we could really transform business and interactions with each other and the impact that it has on an entire organization and the community. And so it kind of begins with the idea of three fundamental social styles. And are these slides working? Okay. So if we can go to the three fundamental styles of social interaction. And so he really talked about givers, takers, and then this other group called matchers. A lot of the process from the beginning was looking at just givers and takers. And so I will just real quick kind of look at the definitions of the givers and takers. So the takers, they get more than they give. And I think we all probably couldn't identify with either somebody like this or, immediately somebody comes to mind, somebody who is really truly that competitive that it is dog eat dog, zero sum. I win, you lose. Ha, end of day, right? It's all about winning for me, not about anything else, but it's about me. And that is kind of a generally assumed concept that this is just how business goes. And then you have the givers, which is give more than you get, generously sharing their time, energy, knowledge, skills, ideas, and connections. And all of this is for other people to benefit. It's a fascinating thing because I've had conversations, even in the process of reading through this book and sharing some of the ideas with a couple individuals, and the thought was, well, is a person inherently one or the other, or does it change based on where they're located or what the environment is? And we'll get into this further as we move into the conversation. But I think the common assumption has been for many, many years that regardless of who you are, when you get into business, a good person who's a good negotiator, a good networker, a good not necessarily collaborator, but the negotiating, the leading, those pieces, they tend to function from a taking perspective, that they're going to lead the way and take over, and you just, if you're not a taker, then you just follow, right? That they're kind of the leaders. And so that's where this agenda kind of gets turned upside down in what Adam processes through in this book. The third group is really where he talks about kind of the sharing of those two things. So they're aiming for that balance between giving and taking. And these are people who really are, in a sense, calculating. I've given you something, therefore I expect to receive something back. Or I've taken something from you, therefore I owe you one. And so I will make sure that I do my best to give that back, and kind of play that matching game. So when they talk about this, and the big thing for matchers is really a sense of fairness, a very high sense of fairness, and they really do this to push others to be authentic, but they also really are doing this as they're kind of seeking what he calls reciprocity, this idea of give and take and back and forth. So as we have looked at this, let me just ask you before we've gone on to the next one. That's right. Here's the crazy thing. When in the studies that they've done, they found, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, let me just interject. If you're on Facebook Live and you're watching this, we would love to be able to share these slides with you. So if you can send us your email in a direct message, not publicly on the forum, but in a direct message through Messenger, send us your email and we'll send you a copy of these in case you can't see this very well here. So in the studies that they've done, they found that 19% of the population they studied, and these were primarily in business or organizations, 19% were takers, were identified as takers, 25% were identified as givers, and the other 56% were identified kind of in the middle as matchers. So knowing that those are kind of the three categories in which they've kind of put these styles of social interaction, Adam asks the question, who do you think suffers the most in the workplace? Which of these three categories at the end of the day seems to be at the bottom of performance, the bottom of a sales revenue sheet, the bottom of leadership? Do you have an idea? Does anybody? I know you've read the book, so actually I think we have several who read the book, so you probably have the answers. But I'm curious, before you read the book, if we can, what were your thoughts before that? Who would have been at the bottom, or who do you think is at the bottom?
I mean, before I read the book, I was thinking either givers or matchers, because I felt like you can get the sense of, people wanting to help people who are genuine is kind of like something that, is sort of intuitive in the way. Like, nobody really, the population, I don't think, really wants people who take. So I felt like it was, givers or matchers that would kind of end up at the bottom, unfortunately.
And at the bottom, meaning that they were the ones who were basically like taken advantage of.
Yeah, taking advantage of. Yeah.
And that's a common, and actually the research bears that out, that is true. And so that, and it's not the matchers, it's the givers. The givers across the board are at the bottom of the list. That can be a little I'm sorry. I think I'm a bit of a giver, so that's a little bit discouraging. So here's the question then. If givers are at the bottom, then who's at the top? What does the research that they found, what does the research show that this group is at the top of the performance charts?
Takers.
Yeah, intuitively, you definitely think takers.
Intuitively, we think takers.
Givers.
Through his research, it's the givers. It's not the matchers. It's not the takers. The lowest performing group are also the highest performing group. And that piece is what has caused them to really dig into this book and try to understand what is it about the givers that both is extremely difficult and challenging for who they are, and what is it about givers that leads them to such incredible success. And so that's the premise of the book, which I love, because then they basically, they begin to talk about, okay, how do you identify takers? How do you look at the matchers? And then where do we work all of these different groups together? And especially when you want to have givers as the ones who are pushing the way and moving forward, because they work in such a way that is leadership driven from a team dynamic, from a collaborative standpoint. It's incredibly impactful for networks and even in negotiation factors that play into what it means to be a giver at the table. And so that's where this gets to be a lot of fun. Let me move on to this. So we were looking at Oh, okay. Thank you. So the question being, in your life, who have you seen achieve the most success in the long run? Okay, that was what I just asked. The matchers, the takers, and the givers. I'm getting ahead of myself even on my own slides. But here's my next question, and this is something I'd love to hear your feedback in. And if you're online, would love to hear your comments. If you want to, comment and put some conversation pieces in there. Tiffany is helping to watch the comments, and we'll help throw those out here. But what are the situations in which you operate more like a matcher versus a taker or a giver, and what triggers bring out that style for you? See, the idea is that you may have a specific core tendency to which you want to give or take or match, but then we also work within the environment that we're built into. So let me just ask you, in terms of your experience, what has been places where you have found yourself maybe being more of a taker or a giver or a matcher, and in what context? And can you think of things that have triggered for you to say, oh yeah, I need to be more aggressive and take in this way, or maybe you might even say, there's one area that I don't even know how that works.
Yeah.
That's just not me.
Yeah.
So what do you
feel like, in business, I always want to feel like people are getting that we are exceeding the value of our product, in terms of the price you pay for training or whatever. I never want somebody to feel like, oh, this is, they should be doing more in that sense, or, the facilities should be better. We should, so that in that sense, I really feel like, I'm more of a giver in that sense. And it's kind of, difficult in that realm, because you do want to be paid for your work. You want to be compensated for your time. You want all these things, but at the same time, the reputation that I think we want to have as a business is to be known as people who are going to go above and beyond, be out there supporting athletes at their events and stuff like that. So, that for me, I feel like, taking always puts me in an awkward position. That's not a lot, I feel very out of place if somebody's, going out of their way to do something for me, or if they're, offering something to me, seemingly free or whatever it might be. So that puts me a little out of place. And then in my normal life, I feel like I do get in the habit of matching quite a bit, with like relationships, friendships, things like that, where I'm just as guilty as the next guy. If somebody doesn't reach out to me, as a friend or whatever, there's a lot of college friends that I don't necessarily, keep in touch with anymore. So I do see myself being a matcher in that sense of like where I spend my time with, friends and family and things like that, are people who, they want to have a relationship with me. I want to have a relationship with them. So that's kind of, the way I sort of fall into that is,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's an interesting piece that you bring up there. A couple items that you mentioned. One, when you said how the concept of being a taker and you feel awkward in that in that role. I would throw out the idea that that's probably still resting in the matching phase, because if somebody's giving to you in that way, you're feeling awkward because there's the recognition that you want to reciprocate. Right. That there's going to be something that you want to be able to give back.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's where I'm
not going to forget that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of those pieces where it's like, okay, now I owe them one.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So that may be where some of that awkwardness may play.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
With your college friends and this idea of not staying in connection with them, I think that actually leads right into this idea of building networks. Yeah. Because it plays into that notion of, life journeys take us to different places. And just by nature of change of proximity, the relationships will change. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the network is broken. It's just a recognition that there's a different dynamic in play. Yeah. And And so who you are as a person, as a giver or a matcher or a taker, not you specifically, but for all of us, who you are as a person is a giver, taker, or a matcher. That also plays into those networks and the dynamic of how you can even feed back into those older networks or networks that maybe have been, just by time or distance are a little, I think they use the word weaker network. But it's still or dormant relationships.
Ties, yeah.
Exactly. Those are still very important things to look at. So that concept of building networks, the question here was, can people build up networks that have breadth and depth using different reciprocity styles? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think that people can build up their networks with a breadth and depth using a different style, whether they're a matcher or a taker or a giver? What are your thoughts?
I feel it. Well, do you mind if I butt in?
Well, please, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it becomes a lot. There's a lot more work that I think is required if you are in the matching spectrum or the taker spectrum. It's going to take a lot more work because it's not going to be something that's as genuine or as it just seems like if you're constantly just doing things for the sake of getting something back, like a matcher would be, or you're just trying to take from a group, that's not going to really expand the breadth or depth of the relationship. It's just going to be a constant back and forth. It's not it. So if there's always that back and forth, I think that can allow. I mean, that doesn't certainly rule out the possibility of there becoming a more meaningful relationship there, but it's definitely not givers. I think he kind of makes this point in the book is that like givers are going to kind of be able to create that environment without as much effort, if you will, if that makes sense. So it's not going to take as much tit for tat type interaction to create a more meaningful environment for your network. So, But
I think the word that you're trying to find, and this is where it's this notion right here, that takers and givers really do have the potential to develop large networks in equal capacity. The question is sustainability.
Yeah.
And a sustainable network is one that they've found. Again, I'm going to keep pointing back to this is research. This isn't just somebody making this stuff up. This is actual research that shows that a giver's network is far more sustainable than a taker's network. The taker may be able to build a huge network, but it doesn't take long for, like what you were saying earlier, reputation to come back around and people to realize they're only in it for themselves. And the matchers will hold them accountable to that. That's part of the fun of this, is that you have matchers who will say, there is no way I'm going to let you keep taking from other people, and they will find ways to literally knock the takers down. It's a very interesting dynamic when you begin to look at where people actually fall into this. And so the takers they can build large networks, but the sustainability is not there at all. So the best value for a sustainable network is really found in a giver's construct. And so that's part of how this all plays out, is when you're building your network to think from a giving perspective. And we'll touch on that a little bit in terms of what that actually looks like. Another area to look at is the idea of protecting your network. So this is part of a key piece too, is that the idea that this isn't a new concept, and we oftentimes people realize, even as takers, that they somehow have to change, or at least morph into something that people will see as more of a matching kind of a personality, even though they may still have a taking motive. Exactly. We're looking at it's really looking at the depth of the motivations of what's driving their actions and behaviors. But many takers have become good fakers. And that's actually a terminology that he uses in the book. He calls them fakers. And so, the quote that he uses is from Samuel Johnson, that the true measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him absolutely no good. It's those kind of questions when you interact with people who are at your place of work, who are a part of the sanitation crew or the janitorial crew, or how you interact with people who literally have no ability or no place to move you forward. That's where some of those telltale signs begin to play out. Have you seen that in your own athletics experience or with the business, where you've seen somebody who's kind of played that role where you recognize maybe later this person was more of a taker than I initially thought? They were faking the collaboration or faking the connection point. And what did that do for you internally? Not, I mean, you don't have to name names, but
this is a really good. I mean, I could draw on a lot of sports experience where you can see this happen a lot. Like you can definitely tell. Playing for a good example is a college summer league team. Like, I mean, I played for the Hamilton Joes for my last year of summer ball. And
shout out to Hamilton Joes.
Shout out to Daryl. Yeah. So like you get a good sense of like, okay, what the kind of person somebody is, or even on the golf course or whatever it might be, by seeing how they interact in competition. Is if a guy goes 0 for 4, but the team's winning by 3-4 runs in the last inning of the game, and the guy's still throwing his helmet across the dugout, he's not. You just kind of get an understanding of like, okay, this guy's not necessarily pulling for the team. He's more worried about keeping his hit streak going or whatever it might be.
Stats,
so boosting his stats or whatever it might be. So it definitely, or in like the powerlifting realm, that's just as much a team sport. When I was training at a gym before we opened our facility in Blue Ash, where it's very much a team sport behind the scenes, because you got a lot of people that are helping you, with lift spotting and in the training session. So, and it definitely, you can definitely kind of tell the guys that are like really just focused on themselves, and it doesn't do the group any good. Coming from a really high level facility like where I was training Blue Ash, like those people don't really stick around too long most of the time. And the people who are usually left and in that same training environment, they keep going for a long time, and they have the ability to kind of raise the competitiveness level and raise the whole group up with them. So I mean, you can definitely spot that in the athletic world pretty easily, but it's a little more difficult in business, just because.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask, was business, to how do we flip that to say, how do you spot a person like this, and what kind of clues do they leak? What kind of things? Yeah.
I always feel like a lack of attention to what the other person is saying or needing could be like a pretty good clue. That idea of self-absorption is a little more apparent, even if they may say, "Oh, I'm doing this to help you too." If they keep that at a real abstract level, and then are really specific about what they get out of it, that tends to come through.
Sure. Okay, so that's, I mean, that idea that they may say one thing, but their actions belie another. Yeah. Any other thoughts of how do you spot a taker who may be faking it, and what kind of things do they seem to just leak? Any comments online or other people here?
Well, I think he talks about it in the book, and I think it is true in practice in business. There are people who are very successful in business, but are also always bringing other people along with them in that success, whenever they can and it makes sense. And there are those who are just tromping all over everybody, and I think that, that comes back to that sustainability. Takers, to me, will always be happy to be taking, where a giver kind of banks they are investing and they're banking their relationships and they're, not because that's why they're doing it. It just automatically happens. So, I would think that, in my experience, I've seen that somebody who is more of still competitive, but more of a giver with a business community has other people reach out to them to help make them successful.
Yeah.
They have to promote themselves less because other people are doing that for them. And they usually get a safety net faster when they get in trouble.
Right.
If business takes a dive or something unforeseen happens, and people tend to rally around that business owner saying, we have to help them. Where if it's a taker, they kind of just like, wow, whatever.
Yeah. It's when you're mentioning that, especially that idea of bringing somebody along, that sparks a memory from my own experience early out of college, and I was working in an organization where, in my particular capacity, we had to make some real important and vital changes to the programs. But it also meant that there was going to be a lot of pushback from the community that we were serving. And my supervisor, who was the CEO of the organization, we were sitting together and brainstorming how best to go through this process. And I was essentially kind of saying, maybe I ought to just fold a little bit and not do this. And he said, no, I believe that this is what we need to do. You're new, you don't have the bank investment here yet. You don't have the reputation or those pieces, so I will make the call for you. And he basically said, I'm putting my chips in your corner, and my investment, my bank, is going to back your actions. What that did for me, as somebody who was just coming into leadership and management in this organization, totally revolutionized how I understood what it meant to lead people from that construct of, I was following somebody who was giving, and he was giving because it was going to impact the greater good of the organization. It wasn't about how it made him look, because he made people mad at him. I mean, there were some people that were not happy with him. But to your point, Dan, that was just a tremendous gift in that role. And I look at that and going, right there, that was an opportunity for me to learn how to be a giver, and seeing how he led me down in that role and brought me along. So this is really an interesting piece is some of the other ways to kind of recognize a taker in your network. Is assess their other networks and see how they've treated their peers in other places. I'm trying to remember the organization. He talks about it in the book. One of the businesses, they talk about how when they go to hire somebody, they go to LinkedIn and they look for a connection to that person or that person's organization, and then they reach out to those mutual connections and just ask them kind of on the side, hey, how does this person interact with you, or how does this person interact over here? So there is that sense that this network piece really does play out. So accessing their other networks to see how they've treated their peers, observe their actions and conversations. That kind of goes to your point of just, if they say one thing, but then their behavior is different. And it really is that self-absorption and self-glorification. The third thing is back to the internet piece, but, track things online. You can do Google searches. You can. I know this sounds really practical, and I think it is. It's a helpful piece, because sometimes in the moment of the interaction, it may be difficult to really ascertain whether somebody is truly taking. So this is a way of just protecting yourself in that process of trying to build a network and develop something that will be beneficial for you and everybody else. Recognizing too that networks really, it's about interdependence, and that's the strength of the network. It's about it being a team. Sometimes I like to point to like a basketball team where you have a good point guard, and the point guard's job is to oftentimes pass the ball around and get it to the person who can score. They're celebrating the fact that the whole team is winning, and not whether or not they're back to your point, padding their stats. but using that as a capacity to be able to build the team. So once you've spotted a taker, how do you deal with it? What do you do? What are the best strategies for protecting yourself against somebody who is a taker? Especially maybe in a business construct or with a team, or I'm curious to your thoughts on that. Once you've identified somebody as a taker, what do you do?
To me, I mean, there's a certain level of like respect that you owe any human, you know. So it should never become a hostile. I'm very anti-confrontational as it is, so in most cases, but you know, you owe any human a certain level of respect and dignity and all that. But it is, you know, and this is kind of having already read the book. You know, you do have to kind of resort to almost that mature mentality, and protect yourself, because you know it becomes you know, it can become pretty hostile and pretty, you know, there's a lot of people that are trying to take advantage of you and you know, kind of promote themselves. So it does become best to adopt that mature mentality, which is, you know, I'm giving away some of the clues of the book, but I think that's a very important thing to learn is, you know, in the real world, like, you know, I see it a lot in these like multi-level marketing type stuff, like people that are, you know, promoting this product or saying, you know, here's a great opportunity to work from home. Well, then you look at it, well, they're making $200 to get you to sign up for whatever it might be. So it's like, you really have to be aware of, you know, what's happening and make it like I said, adopt that matures mentality in a way. But, but
any other thoughts for just how, if you encounter somebody, you've identified them as a taker, do you cut them off entirely? Do you try to work in a construct of matching, you know, or
I think it's kind of proceed with caution. I mean, you obviously can't cut all the takers out of your life. You know, eliminate half the population. But
19%.
You know, but I think that, you know, kind of buyer beware type thing. You know who you're dealing with, and you know they're probably looking for something, you know, to get out of this relationship. I think it's also okay to call a taker on it and just say, you know, if you're entering into some kind of a relationship with a visitor, whatever, and say, you know, what are you expecting to get out of this?
Yeah.
You know, this is why I'm doing it, but what do you expect to get out of this? Yeah. Kind of lays the card on the table.
Sure.
You know,
sure.
Kind of calls them out and says, you know, I see who you are, I know what you are. I'm not evaluating. I'm just, you know.
Yeah.
Well, and this kind of plays back to the notion, and one of the stories that is in the book is of a basketball player, athlete, who gets injured, becomes a negotiator for a basketball team, and so he attends some classes to become a better negotiator, and he learns through the process near the end of the class that he was literally scored the highest on being the most ruthless negotiator, because he was all about taking in that zero-sum game. And there was the recognition on his part when they did the evaluations and when they kind of scored these things where he ranked so high in being ruthless. And the other aspects of negotiating, you know, win-win and helping the other team win, or the other party win as much as he was, he scored, you know, being most you know, collaborative and all those other, you know, things that you would like to see in an employee or whatever else. He scored 0, but had, you know, huge ranking on being the most ruthless. And there was the realization that he was performing as a taker because he thought that was the environment, that's what the environment required. When they looked back on his past, he had been a giver, just in his own core personality was to be a giver all the way up through his college years, and had been literally giving so much, even in the athletics world, that's actually what catapulted him into some of these leadership roles. But when he stepped into this role, he thought he needed to be something different. And that, I think, is where we really need to be kind of careful and watch how it is that the environment plays such a role, especially in the business world. The fascinating piece was he actually used a name that then was a pseudonym for this basketball player negotiator, because the basketball player asked, please don't give my name. Even in that environment, there was still this sense that a taker was the best way to move forward as opposed to being a giver in negotiating. And he was afraid that he would lose some of that, even though his own personality's changed, but he asked not to be identified in that way. And that's just, I think that speaks to this notion of, if you identify somebody as a taker, that not to assume that that is exactly who they are at their core. It may be a part of, a specific issue or an environment or something that they're trying to get to. So yeah, Dan, to that point, asking the questions, what's really going on here, and to see if you can kind of pull out a little bit more, not to burn the bridge, but to try to find a way to even provide some sort of a redemptive opportunity for them to come back around. So let's look at growing your network. So this idea of growing your network from a giving perspective, you have strong ties, and those are great places to be able to continue to grow your network. But one of the things that they found in their research was that the area that has the most potential for growing your network the strongest and the biggest and the best is actually with your weak ties and your acquaintances. Because your strong ties, you already have those connections. But it's the weak ties, and that's why I wanted to speak back to your college experience and those connections. Even though time and distance has maybe allowed those to become a little weaker, they actually talk about in the book is to find ways to continue to reach back into your weak connections, especially if you're coming from a giving perspective. You will have left that relationship with a pretty decent foundation. That it's very easy for those relationships to start back up again.
Yeah.
And in that process, gives you the opportunity to connect with people who have moved maybe to a new place, a new opportunity, and those will broaden your networking horizons because you're stepping into new conversations with somebody that you already have a trusted relationship in the background. Yeah. LinkedIn is a perfect example of, lean into your university connections on LinkedIn, because some of those collective experiences become a part of what it means to work with somebody who's in a similar environment. But can you speak to something like that? Have you had an experience, maybe even with somebody from your college days that maybe you've connected with that could speak to this?
I think, I don't have a ton of close friends from that era, but I do have one of my closest friends who's the best man at my wedding and all that. He's kind of one of those guys that was, we lived together, did everything together, and now it's kind of one of those relationships where you just hardly ever talk and communicate, but then once you get back together, it's like you never really miss the beat. So having that, but it shows how much value there is in being a giver at the front end of relationships like that, because it just doesn't work if you're going to call somebody up and say, if I was identifying as a taker in a sense, and I call up a buddy who knows my personality and I can think of a couple guys that kind of come to mind. If they were to call me today, I'd be like, what the heck? Why are they calling me out of nowhere? You know what I mean? It'd just be like one of those things. It's like, so I think that really puts a premium on the value of adopting the giver's mindset, because, if you do need a favor down the road, that's having established that foundation of trust that is so easily built, adopting that giver's mindset, or maybe not easily built, but is more attainable. Having that mindset is really valuable thing, because it does, even though ties may become weaker, the foundation of trust is there to be able to build on that and help each other in the future. So that's, when I think back to like guys like that, it comes down to like the kind of person you are and the kind of person they are, and how much you can really afford to trust one another, because there's plenty of guys that, like I said, if they're calling you up out of nowhere and your relationship with them, before was clearly they identified as a taker, you may have identified them as a taker. It just doesn't leave a lot of room for, it doesn't apply. There's not a lot of willingness to help.
Sure.
Whether or not you do help is maybe your own decision or whatever, but I think it just goes to show you how important it is. You never know how much it's going to impact you down the road. Mm-hmm. So you may not get anything out of it now, but kind of the hope is that you're going to just continually grow and perpetuate your success down the road. So,
this is this idea of kind of leaning into that and builds a foundation, mm-hmm. which is really it's a fascinating piece to think, even from earlier days, but even now, mm-hmm. What kind of foundations am I developing today with the relationships and the network that I'm building? It's not that I've built. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you lean back into that, but ask yourself about today, the network that I'm building today, the relationships that I'm developing today. What am I doing to build a foundation that will actually be something that will hold the network, as opposed to just taking and taking and taking? Yes.
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I noticed that a lot of people reach out to me for connections. Do you know so-and-so? Do you know anybody that does that? And I think what's been valuable to me is moving from state to state, that type of thing. I've kept a lot of those relationships. And I just know personally that if somebody asks me for a referral, or can you introduce me to somebody because they see I'm friends with somebody or connected to them or whatever, I'm much more likely to make that connection mm-hmm. when I know that person's a giver than I'm a taker, because that's my reputation. So, if I introduce a connection to a taker, I know that that's only going to be a surfacey, they're looking what they can get. Where if it's, to another giver, then I know that they might actually be able to build the same type of relationship I have with that person, if that makes sense. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more meaningful. So I guess I'm more interested in making those connections that could turn into long-term relationships mm-hmm. as opposed to a quick sale. Yeah. I'm very hesitant to, sometimes I might say to the taker, well, I don't really know him that well.
That's a fascinating question, and I know you've lived in some different sized cities, and my experience overseas, and this is what kind of is feeding this. Do you find that there's a difference in this giving and taking? Is there a correlation to the size of the community?
Yes.
In what way?
And again, it could be that people are charading as something else.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
If you talk about a large metropolitan city, living in, I guess, about the 6th or 7th largest city in the United States, and living in New York as well, there's less time, there's more distraction.
Okay.
And when I lived in New York, people in Ohio used to say, why aren't all people in New York rude? No, they're just distracted. So their time to focus on you is diminished. Mm-hmm. So like if somebody asks you for directions, like here, people will stop and take the time. In New York, it's like, it's down there and on the left and you'll see it. It's just, I think it's other influences mm-hmm. that from a protection perspective, I think that when you're in a risky situation, you probably step into being more of a taker mm-hmm. for survival.
Sure.
And not wanting to show that vulnerability of being a giver.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's certain moments in certain contexts that you want to make sure that for self-preservation or whatever that may need to be. It's interesting that you say that, because my experience internationally has been in similar constructs of, in some places where there seems to be such a massive humanity that it's easier, I think, for some people to just function in a taking capacity with the assumption that I'll never see you again.
Right.
So I'm going to get everything I can now.
No. Mm-hmm.
And it's a short-sighted concept of a sale, as opposed to, I want to develop a relationship where you're going to return back to me. And we may think of certain sales practices as being a very similar kind of a thing of, if that person comes in as a salesperson and thinks it's just a one and done, they're only going to be here once, they're just going to try to get as much as they can, but there's no establishing of a relationship long term, that changes the dynamics of how they're even behaving in that negotiation. And so yeah, those are all different pieces that play into business, and how do we strategize ways that we can build even our organization to make it more giving as an organization. What kind of things can we build into? Yes.
I think vulnerability is a key point, though. I mean, if you're talking about a smaller population, in a given day, you may only be making yourself vulnerable to, 3 or 4 people, or a dozen people. In a much larger situation, you just can't make yourself vulnerable to 100 people that you might come in contact on any given day. Like in the streets of a major city, whether it's New York or Philadelphia or whatever. So there has to be, you protect your own vulnerability. And I think that sometimes the real giving you gets lost in that because it's perceived as weakness.
Yeah.
That you could set yourself up to be a victim, and that's just my experience. And not that I didn't like living in those cities, I loved it.
Yeah.
But I know I'm very different in this environment than I was in Manhattan.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, we sometimes change. We may not even realize it that we're changing given the context, and yeah, the idea of vulnerability and how much self-care is involved with trying to be able to give without being burned out or taken advantage of. So those are some different components. And he actually speaks to those in the book. I wish we could spend more time talking about all this, because there are some really helpful things. And I will just say at the end, the last chapter, he actually or the last section of the book, he actually talks about some ways to develop giving in your organization, in your business. And I'm not even sure I necessarily have them on my notes, but I will say at the end of the book, I will throw some of those out even on Facebook for the questions there and comments. I'll throw some of those different pieces down there, some ideas as to even some websites to look at. He talks about everything from a personal side of like free cycle, some ways to give back and literally give of your possessions, of things that, if you just have no need for those anymore, places to give of your time, places to give in a professional setting like BNI or other types of networking groups. So there are some ways where you can express your giving, and if it's in a business capacity, it may be ways for you to be able to foster the culture of giving in your organization. So we are, let's see, I want to just touch on the communication pieces, because this is also for negotiating, for these kind of different conversations. These are some of the pieces, this powerful communication, and this is often what is touted as being the best way to communicate. And yet, these are often the ways that takers will communicate, and it leaves other people kind of in the dust. But it's speaking forcefully, raising your voice to assert authority, selling with conviction and pride, promoting your own accomplishments or their accomplishments, raising their eyebrows in some kind of a challenge, displaying strength and dominant poses, expressing certainty to project confidence, commanding as much physical space as possible. I read that one and I'm going, okay, wait a minute, how do somehow not have the physical space that I have. And of course I'm looking at you and going, I would not want to meet you in the alley. So
I have to do.
So sometimes it is, and there are challenges to that, even with just your physical size. But all of those other pieces, how you communicate in that power setting really can speak into kind of that type of role that you're playing. So just to be aware of that and be cautious, not only for yourself, but also with those you're interacting with. He talks about this concept of powerless communication, which is really fascinating because it's the idea of speaking less assertively, revealing your own weaknesses, expressing plenty of doubt in that conversation. It's like saying, maybe, or I'm not sure this is a good idea, but what do you think? Those kind of conversations, relying heavily on the advice of others, being willing to ask for help. I've found that even asking for help sometimes, and I've had some experiences in the last couple of months where I've found myself having to ask for help more than I'm really comfortable with. And that's a challenge.
It feels like taking, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, that's my biggest issue with asking for help. Is like, oh, people are gonna, expect we're gonna have to do something in return. I guess it's that matching mentality.
Right. It's trying to figure out how do we do this?
Yeah.
Without feeling like, because I think what happens is, and this is where I think maybe the assumption is, if I ask for help, then I'm being perceived as a taker, and I don't want to be.
Yeah,
perceived
then I
as
have to do something.
Yeah.
Right, so that way I even the playing field. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I think the struggle that we often have is like we take on a lot of responsibility for ourselves, and it's very difficult to delegate certain things. So it's managing that relationship of. Still feeling like you're helping somebody, but there's certain times that you just gotta have that interdependence. I think is the word that I think of. It's not, you cannot be too independent and expect to go very far.
Yeah.
So
I've been challenged with that same thing, of that notion of if you're asking for help, it is that almost a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually a positive thing,
right?
But and I think even from a weightlifting perspective, that's something that I've had to learn. And I'm not saying, I mean, I've been to the gym a number of times and was had a coach a year ago, and realizing in that process that it's when I am my weakest. That I need to ask for help because those things are hanging over my head or whatever, and I've got to figure out how to make sure that I'm not literally killing myself. But to put that into a business construct of how do you ask for help, recognizing that it could appear as being a weakness, but it's also rooted very deeply in a strength that
strength of delegation or strength.
I'm still
it's
with that
a strength
myself.
in and of itself to be able to ask for help.
Yeah, it is.
It is, yeah.
And so it's talking in ways that signal vulnerability, making use of disclaimers and hedging and hesitations. These are all things that I think if you take a class on speaking or how to teach in a classroom, those are things that are actually kind of like taught, don't say that. Don't, remove the ums and the ahs and the hedging and the and yet what they're discovering is some of that type of communication is actually what helps promote the sense of being a giver, because you're literally signaling.
It's more human.
It's human, and there's a sense of signaling like, I want this to be something that we work on together, and because I'm not certain of this. It's an interesting dynamic that they play with the language that way. So the vulnerability, and this kind of goes to what Dan was saying earlier. These were different pieces of notes, just the idea of what it means to be vulnerable in a sale, what it means to be vulnerable when you're in a conversation about persuading, And even when you're seeking advice, how can you be vulnerable in the process of seeking advice and asking for help? Those are all pieces that are really, really important. And I wish we had time to kind of dig into that, but I want to make sure we touch on a couple other things about givers, because there are some cautions that we want to look at specifically, and that is things about, when you have many requests that are coming to you, when you become recognized as a giver, people will continue to come to you more and more. What do you do to avoid burnout? I don't know, can you speak to that at all? Have you had experiences where you felt like you just had way too much on your plate and
Yeah.
And people keep coming and asking for more, or you're giving more? How do you avoid the burnout? What do you do to balance that out?
Go play golf.
Okay. I mean,
but a lot of in all seriousness, you have to have something where it's
Some kind of
your
outlet.
own thing.
Yep.
And it's I play the guitar. That for me is very comforting. Some avenue or outlet that's, at least for me, it has to feel like it's in a completely other realm.
Yeah.
To really, rebuild or re-energize in a way, than being able to come back with more focus and energy. Because it's, sometimes the worst thing you can do is just keep trying to do what needs done, and it's just not as efficient, it's not as productive. So there's a balancing that is something I'm still learning how to do and still trying to become better at, because it's really difficult being in the kind of work that we do, because work is not, for us, it's not sitting at a desk and sitting, it's sometimes it's stuff like that, but most of it is really draining, managing 10, 12 kids in a class, or 40, 50 kids in a high school weight room can be, exhausting. And you get to the end of the day and you're like, so for me, I have to have that some kind of outlet where it's a, something where I'm drawn into myself and really, drawn to something else. So, but it's, I think it's different for everybody too.
Sure.
Everybody's a little different. People, sometimes people get energy from being around other people. Sometimes people get energy from drawing into themselves. So it's, but I don't know.
Well, and I think that's the important thing is to really have that self-awareness.
Yeah.
And as a giver, recognizing that part of what happens is, because you keep giving, there comes a point where there's a bit of burnout. I mean, giving takes emotional, mental, and I would even argue spiritual energy from you. I mean, it really draws everything out of you. So it's those questions of what do you do to find ways to replenish the mental, emotional, spiritual aspects. Yeah. And those are all critical components to, so finding that harmony, work-life harmony. That's I like to talk about harmony as opposed to balance.
Yeah, I like that.
Because when we seek balance, it's kind of like you're teetering, right, between two things. And when you find that balance, then you want to stop. And if you stop, then that's a point of stasis. Yeah. It's, and it's like, okay, nothing in life is actually stopped. Mm-hmm. So it's a harmony. How do you find the harmony between those pieces, and how do you work that out so that you can navigate these things and have those downtimes, whether it's golfing or guitar or literally a point of meditation or quiet time or whatever that is, but finding something that actually then can be that rejuvenating aspect. And some people get rejuvenated and re-energized by being with other people, while others,
To the point too, I should, not fail to mention the importance of fitness and exercise too. Like that's, that's everything I learned in school is kind of rooted in the idea that, without your fitness, that is health. Fitness and health are there. It's the best predictor of your risk of disease and all-cause mortality more than any other risk factor combined. So that's something everybody needs to understand, is like, you're going to have a hard time being physically and mentally, capable of performing your best, no matter what your line of work is, unless you have that kind of foundation of physical exercise. I mean, it's such a great tool for anything. You can't say that being more fit is not going to help you in almost any aspect of life. So that, I mean, interjecting that there, I feel like is appropriate because people, if you want to learn how to improve your fitness, I know a good place to go. So, but I mean, it really is a foundational component to a lot of the stuff we're talking about is, making time for your own physical health and wellness is a huge piece of the puzzle in my mind. So
Thank you. I mean, that is I was kind of focusing on the mental, emotional, spiritual, but you're right. The physical aspect is equally, just as important. Mm-hmm. It's that harmony of all those pieces of making sure, the fitness, getting out and walking, whatever
it is,
weights,
doesn't matter.
But to get active.
The best exercise program is the one that people will do. So that's, there's no right or wrong way to move your body. That's something I've had to learn. I've really realized there's many avenues of fitness, and that's, honestly very important for people to understand is it just doesn't require tons of anything. It's, it's just having a little bit day to day. So,
So now that we've kind of highlighted a couple things and just those cautions for givers, and honestly, there's more in the book. But just to be aware that there are some things in areas that tends to be where the givers fall to the bottom of that performance level because they're so focused on trying to take care of other people and other pieces to that their own performance suffers. And so that's where some of those cautionary pieces come in is make sure that you're being aware of where you might your own performance, your own ability to be successful suffers as a result of that. So the successful giver then they kind of highlight two different types. So they talk about a selfless giver, and that's with high other interest and low self interest, and they usually pay a price for it. That kind of is on the heels of this cautionary tale of being, cautious for givers. Mm-hmm. The otherish givers are those who are willing to give more than they receive, and they have their own ambitious goals for advancing their own interests. So this is where they really start to kind of define some of these pieces a little more closely, that it does take a little bit of more self-awareness and more learning of just what's actually involved, because being an otherish giver may be perceived, in the wrong fashion in certain circumstances. So just kind of being aware that that's an area to focus on is being willing to give, and really willing to give more than you receive, but then also still pushing forward and have your own ambitions. Abraham Lincoln was, is a great example of that, of how many different times he threw his own campaign away to help somebody else succeed. And even when he became president, his arch rivals he put into all the highest cabinet positions because he recognized that their skills were just as important, if not more important, than his own. And people were just really floored by the fact that that's what he did. Yeah. But that was a giver where he literally brought people into his inner circle who were his arch enemies, but they helped him succeed in being, in that capacity as president. So he needed them, but he also was giving to them in that capacity. So the other thing is to be a successful giver is really without wasting time to the takers who extract the value and move on, but also to be a little more systematic about how you help others. So paying attention to who's asking for the help, paying attention to how they treat you, making a list of reasons to say no. It's okay to say no. So maybe planning in advance to have just a few different lists of things. No, this isn't the right time. I'm sorry, I'm not ready, but some realistic reasons no, so that you have something planned. Oftentimes I think as givers, a giver may want to say, well, yeah, sure, I can help you. And then they say yes to this and yes to this and yes to this, and then realize they're stuck. So it's okay to say no, and plan for that in advance. So those are some things. Have you experienced anything like that where you feel like you've got to kind of plan in advance for how you want to work in a particular region or say no to certain things?
Yeah. A lot of it's mostly stuff that we have to figure out, where we're going to allot our time. So, I mean, that's something we still struggle with, still have to get better at, is making sure we allot times for things, because there's so many things to do that could be done at any given time, that it's like making lists of priorities and just really figuring out, okay, like we have to do this. At some point, this needs to be done. So that's kind of, for me, the hard thing. It's not necessarily like lots of people coming and asking me. It's just, it's prioritizing our own work and own building improvements, or online type work and stuff that we need to really get better at prioritizing and spacing out our day so that it doesn't become too distracted. So
well, and that speaks to the idea of if we are a giver in an organization, and maybe we've launched a business, as you guys have launched a business, and if you're coming at it from a giving perspective, you really have to be careful about that notion of, am I running the business or is the business running me? Right? Because that ultimately, that's kind of what it's coming down to, is if you're the giver, the business becomes the taker.
True. Yeah.
And
that's kind of what I was saying. It's not necessarily people.
Right.
It's the business itself has many responsibilities and things that need attended to. So it's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So this tells me that we need to have another conversation about how to help you get some pieces in place. Sorry, that's a whole other side note, but this is a part of what it's about, is helping you figure out, how do we run the business in a way that it truly becomes a giving organization and is structured and has the systems and the operations in place to literally let you still own and operate the business, and not the business owning you. Yeah. And owning your time and everything else. Yeah. So because that's a critical piece, especially in the early stages of the startup. Is that's where people will end up burning out and giving up, is because the business literally eats them alive. Right. And so I'm going to slide forward a few slides. We've got some other slides there, but I want to get to the one where it talks about, and it's the questions. So the one, what type of giving do you find most meaningful and enjoyable? Because this speaks a little bit to you. We're talking about the idea of prioritizing. So I want to ask you this, and for the group here, and if you're online, would love to, feel free to make comments there. What type of giving do you find most meaningful and enjoyable? Is it connecting people? Is it sharing knowledge? Is it providing feedback? Is it mentoring, problem solving, or finding ways to recognize others? The point here is that I, if anything, I want to stress this. Lean into the things that you find most enjoyable. If you're figuring out, okay, how do I even increase my own ability to give? Lean into the things that you find most enjoyable. One example from the book was just 5 minutes a day, do something for someone else, and pick one of those areas. Whatever it is that you really enjoy doing, maybe you enjoy giving feedback. Maybe you enjoy giving, recognizing somebody. So maybe it's somebody recognizing it in the gym, or maybe it's somebody recognizing, what can you do on LinkedIn to celebrate somebody else, to give a reference to somebody else, to connect to people. 5 minutes to do an email that says, hey, I know you're over here and you're over here, but I think you guys have some things in common, and I would love for you to meet and connect. That's it. But that's the helping. There's no motivation on your part to get anything out of it, but it's just, this is my job to help give and build the network. So that's just one thing. And then it's that question of, how might you let others know that that's what you enjoy giving? So just some things to think about as you're taking away some things from today. The definition of success is that givers get to the top without cutting others down, finding ways of expanding the pie that benefit themselves and the people around them. I wrote a post on it was just a brief thing, but I wrote this a couple weeks ago, that the mentality and the difference, the worldview really difference between abundance and scarcity. And an abundance mentality means that there is far more business out there than we will ever be able to handle. And a scarcity mindset is one that's like, I've got to take everything I can because I need this. And it's a zero-sum game. And that really does affect so many different aspects of your business, your sales, your finances, your customer service, your marketing. If you come from an abundance standpoint, it really feeds right into this idea of giving. Because there are ways that you can function and work even with people who might be a competitor and work in an abundance mindset that helps to give and help them be successful, and at the same time makes you successful. Yes, is there?
Carol Lucio is online. She's
Okay.
been commenting, but she said, what if we all tried to help each other / each other get to the top?
That would be a phenomenal community, wouldn't it? Yeah, and the idea is not to necessarily make everybody givers, but it's recognizing that some people are matchers, but when they're in the environment of givers, they will want to do the same thing. So there are ways that you can hire matchers or bring people into your business even. You know, it's how do you work in an environment when you realize that maybe you hired somebody who's a taker. What do you do to help them work and become more of a giving? You know, what kind of teams do you need to develop? What kind of things do you? But I love that idea of what would it look like if everybody began to move that direction. And that's truly, I think, where Adam talks about in his book. He really, his big push was, I want a world of givers. And that's what his goal is to develop a world of givers, recognizing that's not always going to happen. But then how do we do that in a way that really helps move people forward? Yeah, thanks, Carol. That's great. Any other comments or things there to share there? Okay. So let's see. Let's see. There was another the give and take. Another couple questions. This here could be a whole other conversation. I would love to just hear your thoughts, and even for you guys here that are in the room, feel free. Let's maybe continue this on Facebook on this stream, because this is one that I'm really interested with. But I would love to just hear people's comments. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions people have about givers, and how might you help change their minds? The second question there is, have you noticed any gender differences in these styles of give and take? Or even, are there differences in industries or differences in countries? Where that gets to dive into some of the culture issues, you know, gender issues, culture issues, country, location, industries. Those speak to some deeper pieces. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. And so a couple of things, just some. Instead of calling them key takeaways today, I thought I'd call them key giveaways. So I'm just kind of playing with that, all right? So key giveaways. Instead of trading value, aim to add value. Givers succeed significantly by recognizing the potential in others.
I like that one a lot.
Yeah.
I thought there was a really fascinating study in there. When they did the IQ test in like first graders, and then identified 20% of them as, you know, having the ability to, I don't know what the word, blossom. They had the potential to blossom or something like that. And then, you know, the teachers literally taught them differently, and their IQ test scores came back having improved more than the rest of the group. So that, for me, like as a coach or anybody that's, you know, teaching anything, it's like, that was really cool, because if you looked at everybody at having, you know, a very high ceiling or being able to go well past where they are, I mean, looked at people like that, I mean, it's just an automatic way to improve the likelihood that they're going to be, you know, for us, we take a lot of measurements and do a lot of results-based, you know, training. So, you know, being able to look at people like that is like a really kind kind of a paradigm shift, if you will,
Sure,
that I thought was really cool. But
it really speaks to that notion
Yeah.
of the level and the magnitude by which change happens when you have somebody who believes in you.
Yeah.
I mean, that truly is a powerful, powerful thing to have somebody who's, that's speaking to, my experiences as a young professional and having a leader who believed in what we were doing, believed in me. And the same thing as a teacher, believing in the students and the potential, the capacity.
Yeah.
So what do we do when we are the owner of a business and we have employees? Are we there to serve our employees, or are we there to expect our employees to do what we say? And to what capacity does that look like when we say we want you to reach the full potential that you have in our environment, in our team?
Yeah.
Those are great things. So through vulnerability, asking questions, talking tentatively, givers benefit from this powerless communication to build prestige and influence. Successful givers are willing to give more than they receive and have ambitious goals for advancing their own interests. The givers characterize success as individual achievements that have a positive impact on others. And this is the last thing I want to leave with you, and that is the 5-minute challenge. I mentioned it earlier, but that is that notion of if you were looking to do something and make a 5-minute favor for someone else, what would it be? What would it be if you were to take every day and just have a 5-minute favor for somebody else? What would it be? You don't have to answer now. I'm not even, but these are things for you to kind of ruminate on. But then I'm going to say this: if you don't act on this right away, this is simply just another conversation that goes away in the wind. So, action steps. Think about the kind of things that you want to do. What things do you want to do now? What things do you need to change now or this week? And what action steps are you going to do to make that change? So I would love to hear what those are. So if you get the chance, please comment on the stream on Facebook here, and we will be watching, and would love to have that interaction with you through the rest of the afternoon and even into the future. Feel free to reach out. My contact information is here. Infinite Ping is the name of the company. You can find us on Facebook, Infinite Ping Inc., INC, and would love to continue the conversation with you. I would love to also just be able to support you in the process of creating the next steps. And so if you've got a couple takeaways or some of the giveaways, some things that you go, hey, I would love to be able to implement this in my own business, in my life, in this next week, share those with me. I would love to be able to encourage you and support you in that. It's always helpful to have somebody, holding you accountable. It kind of comes back to the coaching aspect of it. And just in the same way, we're all going to get really busy as soon as we shut this off. And we leave here, we go back to the gym, go back to our office, jump in the car. We're going to be dealing with emails and phone calls and all that kind of stuff. So I would love to be able to just say this. Here's my give to you, is that we will be, from our company, we'll be working on a 7-day challenge between now and the end of the year on 2020 vision. Basically saying, do you have a vision for your business and for yourself for the next year? So if you have 2020 vision or you want 2020 vision, send me an email. Tell me the 2 takeaways and your action step that you're going to move on here. And I will invite you to be a part of this. It's an email challenge, so it's something that you'll receive in your inbox, and it will be a 7-day challenge with steps to help you get ready for 2020 and have the vision you want for the coming year. Dan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it so much.
No
And I
problem.
love hearing about the gym. And if you guys need to work out, I think this is a great place to be.
Yeah, especially kids.
I can attest to the fact that when I saw him a year ago, he wasn't this big. So his own gym is doing him some
That's
good.
right.
So yeah, just.
My shirts just got smaller.
Oh,
so,
okay,
yeah.
okay. All right. So you're just buying them smaller sizes.
Right, smaller sizes.
So
Good trick.
Elite Performance and Wellness, and Casey, it's good to meet you. Thanks so much for being with us, and thanks again for joining us here for the conversation. And Dan, thank you for the chamber. Tiffany, Laura, appreciate it so much for helping to support this in the back end. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Great.
Carol said, great job.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.